I'm not exaggerating when I say it felt like waking up in someone else's world. One morning, I stepped out onto my porch with coffee in hand and saw a homeowners association sign hammered into the dirt by my lake, as if somebody had walked in during the night and staked a claim. My lake, the one I paid for, the one I restored and managed through every permit and environmental requirement. Before I could process the audacity of that sign, a silver sedan slid up my dirt road like a knife. The woman who climbed out wore a blazer that probably cost more than my last month's utilities and a smile that never touched her eyes. She marched across my porch, put a red binder down on my table like a warrant, and announced, "You don't own this." "We do." That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be a normal dispute. It was going to be a campaign. I'm a licensed water rights engineer. I live and breathe riparian law, conservation easements, hydrology, and the paper trail that goes with them. When she introduced herself as Diane Mercer, president of the HOA, news to me, because this isn't a cul-de-sac with matching mailboxes. It's rural country with cabins separated by acres. I still tried to be polite. I half wondered if she'd come to welcome me, maybe offer casserole, something neighborly. What I got was a manicured finger tapping a page in her binder as she said, "This lake falls under a conservation easement. It's community property. We'll need to discuss access protocols and usage fees." The paper she slid toward me was dressed up to look official, blocky headings, serif font, language that felt like it had been borrowed from a government form. But it was naked once you knew where to look. No state filing number, no county recorder seal, no signatures from any legitimate agency, just words dressed up as a law. "This isn't a real conservation easement," I said, keeping my tone even. "Where's the original filing? Where's the registration number?" "It's on file with the county," she said smoothly. "This is a certified copy." I opened my own binder, the one I keep precisely for moments like that. Inside were certified copies of my permits, the recorded deed, the riparian rights attached to the parcel, surveys stamped by the county surveyor, photos of the lake restoration process, receipts for every ton of gravel and every pump. "Here's my deed," I said, turning it toward her, the line that states riparian ownership highlighted in yellow. Title insurance would have found any easements. They didn't. Her eyes flicked over the pages. That confident smile started to crack. She folded her arms across that blazer as if it were armor. "Conservation law supersedes private ownership in certain cases," she recited, like reading from a script. "We'll be filing a formal request of the county to clarify jurisdiction. The thing about water rights is that control turns people strange. If it's water, wells, streams, lakes, someone wants it, and they'll wave around terminology they barely understand to make you back down. But I've spent years in permit offices with actual officials who follow actual procedures. Conservation easements don't spring fully formed out of a red binder. They require environmental review by the state, public notice, compensation terms, records with the county planning office, and fish and wildlife. There's a footprint a mile wide. None of that existed here. Those reviews, that public notice, where is it?" I asked. Silence filled the space where her confidence had been. Then she snapped her binder closed hard enough to make the coffee ripple. "You'll be hearing from our attorney," she said, and marched back to her two-clean sedan. I sat there for a long minute with my coffee cooling and the morning turning into something else. Part of me wanted to laugh. She had walked onto my property with fake paperwork and tried to claim a lake I'd poured months into restoring. Another part knew I needed to get ahead of this, because people like that don't fold. They escalate. So I did what I always do, document. I took high-resolution photos of every page she'd shown me. I sent an email to the county permit office attaching images and asking for confirmation of any conservation filings for my parcel. 2 days later, the reply came back. No easements on file. But there was something else. An inspection request had been submitted with my signature on it. Problem was, I hadn't signed anything. Forgery. Someone had used my name to try to trigger a county inspection. I didn't need to guess who. I called James Mitchell, the county surveyor who knew my lake and remembered my restoration permits. "I'll walk the shore and verify your markers," he said. A week later, he met me at the water line. checked the brass caps, cross-referenced the plat, and packed his clipboard with a firm nod. Your deed is solid. Riparian rights clearly attached. Whoever filed that inspection request doesn't have standing. I'll put this in writing. I want to take comfort in that, but comfort felt naive. Diane hadn't struck me as someone who retreated after one failed attempt. She had shown me a fake easement. Now a forged inspection request. What next? I didn't wait long for an answer. The following week I was mid-swing with a framing hammer, building a new dock ladder, when a procession came down my drive like a field trip. At the front, Cynthia Cole, one of Diane's closest allies, dragging half the neighborhood behind her like a courtroom audience. She didn't wave. She didn't even look my way. She marched straight to the water's edge, planted a small HOA sign in the dirt as if she were fixing a boundary stone, and announced, "This is now an HOA amenity." I set the hammer down and took a breath. I snapped photos as they hammered posts into concrete beside my easement road. Fresh concrete, still wet in spots. They had worked through the night. When they hauled a chain across those posts to make a barrier, blocking legal access to my property, I called the sheriff's office. At first, the deputy on the phone sounded like he was bracing for a garden variety neighbor squabble. Then I mentioned the recorded deeded easement and texted photos of the brand new barrier that hadn't existed the day before. His tone changed. "Don't touch it," he said. "I'm sending a unit. That could be criminal encroachment." Deputy Mark Lewis arrived within the hour, a stocky man with tired eyes who looked like he'd seen every version of property rights shouted across a fence. He checked my deed on his tablet, walked to where the easement was marked, put a hand on a fresh post, then looked at me. "This is unlawful entry," he said flatly. "Whoever put this here installed it on your recorded right-of-way. That's a crime." He took photos, measurements, and began an official report. Cynthia rattled the chain and declared the community had redrawn boundaries. When Deputy Lewis asked for permits, she muttered that approvals were pending. His eyebrow climbed. 911 is for real emergencies, he said, not for staking phony claims. While he spoke, Cynthia watched me with an unblinking stare and a twitchy smirk that felt like a threat. "I am the law here," she whispered when nobody else could hear. It was the kind of line that would sound ridiculous if it weren't backed by people pouring concrete on your easement at 2 a.m. There are moments you want to pull out every piece of proof and slam it on the table. I had the notarized county map in my back pocket. I let it sit. Some people reveal more when they think you're cornered. "Do you know who might have done this?" the deputy asked me. I told him about the fake conservation easement, the forged inspection request, the sudden barrier. His jaw set. He made a call. 20 minutes later, another patrol car rolled in. After conferring, they returned with a decision. "We're ordering immediate removal," Deputy Lewis said. "It's blocking legal access. We'll contact the HOA president. Either she orders it down or we remove it and build the organization." It felt like a breath after drowning. For the first time in days, someone with a badge saw through performance. Still, the anger sat there like a weight. Forgery. Trespass. Now physical obstruction. Diane's organization was stacking up crimes as if fines were a negotiating tactic. While we waited for the work crew, I checked the security cameras I'd mounted after Diane's first visit. Nothing fancy. Wireless cams pointed at the access road, the shoreline approach, the cabin path. The time lapse from the previous night showed headlights at 2:17 a.m., a pickup with no visible plates, 2 figures, faces shadowed, unloading posts, measuring and digging with grim efficiency. This wasn't a prank. It was a plan. I'd backed up the video to 3 separate drives and sent a copy with timestamps to Deputy Lewis. "The HOA president claims she didn't know anything," he called back later. "Says some members acted without authorization." He paused. We checked purchase records. Materials were bought on an HOA credit card. Organizational resources used for criminal encroachment. Either Diane ordered it, or she had no control over her board. Neither story ended well for her. The barrier came down that afternoon. The crew cut locks, rocked posts out of concrete, and hauled everything away, leaving raw holes in the dirt. The gravel truck driver, who'd been waiting for hours, finally eased through and dumped the load where I directed. As he rolled out, I noticed new tire tracks leading to the shoreline, deep treads from heavier work trucks. A tight knot formed in my gut. I followed the tracks and found a new padlock on my water control valve. It wasn't mine. I tried my keys. Nothing. Someone had driven to my valve, accessed my equipment, and locked me out of my own water system. That wasn't just trespass. That was tampering. Infrastructure, sabotage. This had never been about the lake for her. It was about control. If she couldn't win in the open, she would try to make the lake unusable. Block access. Lock down equipment. Manufacture enough headaches that I would sell and disappear. My attorney sighed when I called. "We'll add it to the filing," he said. "But Mason, this is moving fast toward full-blown litigation and criminal charges. It's going to get messy." I looked at the padlock and decided I'd rather deal with messy than with theft dressed up as community concern. I photographed the lock, logged the time and GPS location, and added it to the evidence folder. The next day, the phone calls began. Not from the county. From my clients. "Hey, Mason, it's Jennifer Caldwell," one of my long-term clients said, after an uncomfortable pause. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be straight with me." She exhaled. "I got a call from someone who said you're having legal issues, that your judgment might be compromised. She asked if I'd had any problems working with you." I closed my eyes. "That someone wouldn't happen to be an HOA president named Diane?" She didn't answer directly. She sounded very concerned. She had details. Jennifer's voice softened. I told her I'd never had any issues and ended the call. But she implied she had a list of your clients, that she was doing due diligence. A list? She was dialing through my business relationships, one by one, trying to salt the earth. Over the next 48 hours, 3 more clients called, all hit with the same concerned outreach. One paused a project worth $15,000 until things settle. Another told me they were considering a different engineer just to be safe. By Thursday, I'd lost more than 20 grand. Not for something I'd done wrong, but because a woman with a grudge had discovered defamation works better when you phrase it as empathy. My attorney reminded me defamation cases are hard to win. Vague statements wrapped as opinion. Questions asked out of concern. It's a strategy designed to wound without leaving fingerprints. I documented every call with permission, saved voicemails, and added them to the growing file. If she wanted to drag this into the light, I was going to bring every receipt. Amid the noise, an email from the county landed. "Please submit notarized copies of your recorded documents." It wasn't a demand. It was a procedural step. I sent the packet within the hour. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was ammunition. Meanwhile, I received a formal accusation from the HOA, claims that I had obstructed water flow and disrupted natural patterns. The code they cited read like a paragraph lifted from a gardening blog. I opened elevation maps, long-term rainfall records, and runoff modeling, and sent a reply line with footnotes and bold highlights. I knew she wasn't trying to win in court. She wanted to drain my energy. But there's a difference between distraction and defeat. I wasn't going anywhere. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson, one of the few in the community who hadn't bought Diane's polished performance, called. "I heard what happened," she said. "You need help. I know a CPA with forensic training who lives here. Her name's Rebecca Shaw. If anyone can trace the money, it's her." Rebecca was cautious when she reached out. "If I do this, I need to understand the risk," she said. "I live here. She's my HOA president. I understand," I told her, "but if she's doing what we think, she's not just hurting me. She's stealing from everyone who pays dues." Rebecca worked late that night at her home office. Spreadsheets that should have balance refused to line up. Vendor payments to companies built on paper, not brick. Consulting fees paid for services nobody could locate. Equipment purchased at 30 and 40% above market. She cross-referenced business registrations. Shell companies, all tied to the same registered agent, forming in the last 3 years. The signatures authorizing those payments, they belonged to Diane. Rebecca saved everything to multiple drives and called me. Over 3 years, she said quietly. I can see at least $45,000 in questionable payments. And that's conservative. She was willing to testify. She knew the social cost. She chose truth anyway. The next morning, she rang the sheriff's office and asked for Deputy Lewis. The fraud unit opened a formal investigation the same week. As she dug deeper, old records surfaced. Mrs. Henderson had found a 1998 receipt, long before I owned the property, authorizing $8,000 in modifications to the lake's valve system signed by Diane. No board approval. No vote. The modification allowed downstream diversion, an early move to create control. She'd been laying groundwork for decades, waiting for an opportunity to monetize. It wasn't long before the state found its way to my shoreline, too. Patricia Williams from Fish and Wildlife arrived with a clipboard and the calm, unflappable demeanor of scientist. "This is the lake that's caused all the controversy?" she asked, peering into water, so clear you could see the cobbles at the bottom. "Looks well managed." I handed her a thick file. Permits, drainage reports, environmental assessments. She spent 3 hours testing. Dissolved oxygen, turbidity, plant and macroinvertebrate surveys. Every measurement logged with meticulous care. Watching her, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Science isn't swayed by gossip. Halfway through, a car door thudded. Diane walked down the path wearing a smile too tight for her face, followed by a man in an ill-fitting suit carrying a briefcase. "Inspector Williams," she said brightly. "This is Dr. Gerald Winters, environmental consultant. He's conducted an assessment and found significant concerns." Patricia looked up. "Dr. Winters? What organization are you with?" He straightened. "Independent consultant. Watershed management." "Credentials?" she asked. He handed over papers listing a doctorate from Westfield University. Patricia typed for a moment on her phone, brows pulling together. "Westfield University closed in 2003, she said. "It was never accredited for environmental science." "Dr. Winters, are these fabricated?" The color drained from his face. "That's impossible," Diane sputtered. "He was highly recommended." "By whom?" Patricia asked, her tone sharpening. "Because legitimate consultants are registered with state agencies. He's not in any database." Winters fled, clutching his briefcase. Diane stood there with her mask slipping as Patricia took notes calmly. "Presenting false credentials to influence a state investigation is a crime," Patricia said. "If you facilitated this, that's serious." Diane left without another word. Patricia finished her assessment, packed up, and handed me a preliminary sheet. "Water quality is excellent," she said. "Healthy biodiversity. No evidence of downstream contamination. Your aeration system functions optimally. This is one of the best managed private restoration projects I've seen." She paused. "Whoever filed that complaint either doesn't understand environmental science or was abusing state resources. The complaint will be dismissed and flagged." That night, Rebecca called again. "I found emails," she said. Diane had been negotiating a lease with a commercial fishing operation. $30,000 a year to the HOA. The catch? They needed HOA ownership or control of your lake. The emails were time-stamped 6 months before I bought the property. She had promised access she didn't have, and then tried to force reality to match her lie. I put everything together into a single case file. Patricia's official environmental assessment, Rebecca's forensic accounting and shell company documentation, police reports, survey findings, photos, video, voicemails where my clients explained why they'd paused work, a timeline that showed a pattern of HOA abuse, fraud, embezzlement, criminal trespass, and defamation. A week later, James Mitchell called. "There's an administrative hearing next week," he said. Her attorney filed a petition claiming adverse possession and historical community usage. Judge Hartwell will hear it. I loaded boxes of evidence onto a hand truck. The hearing room felt smaller than I had imagined. Gray walls, humming fluorescent lights, a judge with steel hair and a face that said she'd heard every excuse in the book. Diane sat across from me with an attorney, whose eyes kept drifting toward my pile of labeled binders. Ms. Mercer, you filed a petition claiming HOA authority over a lake owned by Mr. Reed. Judge Hartwell began. Mr. Reed, you are contesting. We both confirmed. Diane's attorney presented first. She spoke of long stewardship, infrastructure management, and decades of community investment. And she displayed the 1998 vow modification and a stack of HOA logs. On the surface, it sounded like a story, but it kept sliding on ice whenever the judge pushed on legal footing. And your proof of continuous open and notorious possession? Judge Hartwell asked. We have records of upkeep, the attorney said. Infrastructure. On property you did not own and without permission. The judge cut in. That's not adverse possession. That's unlawful entry. Mr. Reed? I stood and placed my recorded deed on the table. Exhibit A, I said, recorded 2 years ago. Clean chain of title. Title search found no easements or claims. Riparian rights attached. The HOA's modifications were unauthorized. I presented the 1998 receipt signed by Diane without board approval. The judge allowed testimony. Rebecca took the stand and, in steady CPA language, walked the court through shell companies, inflated invoices, and signatures. At least $45,000 in questionable payments, she concluded. The 1998 vow work was part of a pattern. This wasn't community management. It was groundwork for revenue Ms. Mercer intended control. James Mitchell testified about the forge inspection request and survey boundaries. Deputy Lewis detailed criminal incidents. Unlawful entry, the barrier, the padlock on the valve, the midnight workers, the smear campaign. Then Patricia testified about the environmental assessment and the fake consultant who had run at the first question. When Diane finally stood, she clung to the same line she'd had at my kitchen table months before. I was acting in the community's interest, she said. The lease would have funded projects, paid for amenities. Judge Hartwell looked at her for a long beat. By stealing property you did not own, she said. She shuffled through the exhibits, then looked at me. Mr. Reed, you've done your homework. The decision, when it came, was firm. Petition denied. Judge Hartwell said, her voice flat as a closing door. Mr. Reed holds legal title, and there is no valid claim of adverse possession. Ms. Mercer, you are ordered to cease all contact with Mr. Reed. Any violation will be treated as contempt of court. She paused and added, I am forwarding this case file to the district attorney. Given the evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and harassment, I strongly suggest you retain criminal counsel. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the kind of exhaustion that only shows up when you've been holding your breath for months and can finally breathe. Outside, Mrs. Henderson hugged me. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder, and people I barely knew murmured congratulations. A few days later, community members began to stop by the cabin. One of the women, Sandra Mitchell, looked me in the eye and said, I believed her. I voted to support her. I am sorry. Others nodded. A younger guy said they were implementing independent audits. No more single signature authority. Real financial controls. It wasn't forgiveness that came to mind. It was relief. And a reminder that good people can be manipulated when they don't ask for proof. Diane's criminal case moved quickly. At sentencing, the judge spoke of trust broken and a campaign of lies waged to salvage a deal that never existed. The sentence was measured. 3 years probation, $45,000 in restitution, community service, permanent prohibition from HOA leadership, her real estate license revoked. Not a prison door slamming, but accountability that would follow her name. My phone started ringing again for the right reasons. Clients who had paused projects called back. New work appeared because someone had shared my case file, calling it a model for defending property rights with documentation. A state water rights organization invited me to speak at the regional conference about lake restoration, riparian rights, and how to respond to HOA overreach. Patricia's assessment methods got folded into a training module. Rebecca's forensic accounting became a case study for HOA boards across the state. If you want to talk about community healing, that's what it looks like. People learning so they don't repeat the same mistakes. One afternoon, I stood on my dock as a bus of high school environmental science students spilled out onto the grass. I told him how aeration increases dissolved oxygen, how a riparian buffer reduces runoff, how a well-designed overflow lowers flood risk downstream. A girl raised her hand and asked what to do when the other side keeps escalating. I told her what I wish someone had told me the first week this started. Document everything. Follow the law. Don't take the bait of fighting dirty. Evidence wins in the end. Later that evening, I installed a new sign at the entrance. It didn't say keep out. It said lawfully protected waters, community education site, visitors welcome. Because the best answer to someone trying to take what's yours isn't always to build a taller fence. Sometimes it's to open the gate for the right reasons. 6 months after the trial, I hosted a cookout at the lake. Not a meeting with agendas or accusations. A celebration. Kids splashed. Someone set up a grill. Even a few people who had once supported Diane stood at the shoreline, getting their shoes wet, talking quietly about how they'd be a lot more careful next time they trusted a binder over a deed. Rebecca handed me a plastic cup of lemonade. "You did it," she said. "Not just one. Rebuilt." I looked across the water, where the barrier had once blocked the easement. Wildflowers had taken root on the disturbed soil. The lake, the one I had spent months bringing back to life, was thriving, and the community that had almost broken itself had learned something about oversight, property rights, and accountability. And I had learned something too. Protecting your lake, your land, your peace, those are property rights. But protecting the principle behind those rights, defending it with documentation, law, and patience, that's what makes a fight like this worth it. It started with a fake binder and a sign in the dirt. It ended with a judge's gavel, a community that put controls in place, and a lake that became a place to teach the next generation. Sometimes the worst attacks become the best lessons. Sometimes standing your ground isn't stubbornness. It's a way of telling your neighbors and yourself that truth still matters, that conservation and ownership aren't enemies, and that when you know you're right and can prove it, no amount of intimidation can take that away. If you made it this far, I hope you'll carry this with you. Read your deed. Know your easements. Learn your county's process. If someone plants a sign on your land and calls it community property, demand the filing number. If you run into homeowners association abuse or HOA overreach, don't shout louder, document better. And if you've been blindsided by something like this, share your story. The more we talk about property rights, water rights, and the way the law actually works, the harder it becomes for someone to weaponize a red binder and a smile that doesn't reach their eyes.